All right, so in this section, we're going to look at some specific ecosystems. So again, this is uh, section 9.2. It is dealing with ecology, the unit's ecology. We'll look at water ecosystem and land ecosystems. So some aquatic ecosystems and some vocab terms that go with that. So you have marine ecosystems, which we also know as oceans, and some of the different zones. And there's a picture on the next slide. I would recommend you pausing and taking a look at that once you have the vocab terms down. So the intertidal zone is the zone that's underwater at high tide but is exposed at low tide. A photic zone is where the light is going to reach in these aquatic ecosystems. And then this is where you also find the organisms that produce or do photosynthesis. And with the organisms that do photosynthesis, typically leads to the area of highest biodiversity or animal diversity in that area. Aphotic zone is a zone that is always dark, light can't reach it. The benthic zone is the bottom of the ocean, and the pelagic zone is the open ocean. So you can kind of see here in this diagram where we're talking about as far as these different zones of vocab terms for ocean ecosystems. Um, and again, you could pause this and either draw in your notes or just look at the vocab terms to be sure you understand where each of the zones are located. Freshwater ecosystems vary just a little bit, but not a whole lot. So with freshwater, we're talking about lakes or ponds, rivers, anything that's not salt water. They still have the photic and aphotic zones. They still have the benthic zone. The littoral zone is near the area near the shore where plants grow. And the limnetic zone is the open lake. So wetlands are area of lands that are covered with water at least part of the time. And there's two different types of wetlands. You have swamps and marshes, and there's a major difference between the two. And the major difference is the presence of trees. So swamps have trees. You think about like Reelfoot Lake, all the cypress stumps that come up. And marshes, as you see over here, the picture on the right-hand side, marshes don't have trees that grow in these wetlands. Estuaries are the regions where freshwater and oceans meet, kind of like at the mouth of the Mississippi River down in the Gulf of Mexico. And this produces brackish water, which is partly salty water or partly salt water and partly fresh water. And you'll see a mix of marine and freshwater life. And there's a lot of biodiversity here due to nutrient content, both from the river and from the ocean. So very interesting ecosystems at these estuaries. Abiotic factors, again, in ecosystems, we talk about water temperature, currents, nutrient content. So an abiotic factor is any factor in an ecosystem that is not living. So a few terrestrial ecosystems to kind of round up this section. Okay, biomes. We talked about biomes in the last section, 9.1. These are going to be very large areas across latitudinal lines that have similar climate and communities or organisms that inhabit them. So terrestrial factors, so some abiotic factors in terrestrial ecosystems, weather, climate, nutrient content, and you can see all of those vocab terms there. Nutrients are the ones that are kind of overlooked. So these are chemical materials that are needed for organisms to live, like carbohydrates, vitamins, minerals, etc. And there are a lot of nutrient cycles in ecosystems. So with the nutrient cycles, they all typically follow the same pattern with slight variations between these. And as we go through these nutrient cycles real quick, I do suggest you pausing the video, drawing the nutrient cycle in your notes, and labeling it. First was the water cycle, and you're all probably very familiar with the water cycle. This is how water enters the system through precipitation. So water is typically going to gather in oceans and lakes or rivers, streams, even rivers and streams will run into oceans or lakes and then eventually the water will evaporate with energy of the sun, which turns it into a gas, and then it'll rise until it begins to cool off, which then the water goes through condensation and then enters back into the earth, or back on the earth's surface through precipitation. Carbon cycle. So carbon is going to be the second most abundant atom in living things and is required for all organic molecules. So carbon's, of course, found in the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. Of course, you and I can't use carbon dioxide. So how does it enter into our system? So plants are the cornerstone of the carbon cycle in their process of photosynthesis. Of course, they use photosynthesis to make sugar, which has carbon in it, and that's where we get our carbon. So organisms consume carbon molecules for energy and give it back off as carbon dioxide. So when we eat plants or animals that eat plants, when we do cellular respiration to break down those energy molecules, a byproduct is carbon dioxide, and then it goes back to plants. So carbon enters the ground through waste and decomposition, and carbon enters the atmosphere through the burning of fossil fuels. And here's a picture of the carbon cycle. Nitrogen cycle is very similar. So the nitrogen cycle is the most abundant gas nitrogen is the most abundant gas in the atmosphere. So nitrogen diffuses into the ground, and nitrogen in the ground has to be fixed by bacteria. And we talked about fixation of nitrogen a while back, and this is taking inorganic nitrogen and making it organic. So this is taking nitrogen in the ground that plants can't use, fixing it so that plants can use it. Plants then take up the nitrogen and use it in the production of DNA, proteins, or other macronutrients. Animals consume plants, and organisms decompose and return nitrogen back into the soil to be fixed by bacteria. And without bacteria fixing nitrogen and breaking down organisms after death, ecosystems will quickly die out. So again, with nitrogen being the most abundant gas in the atmosphere, that doesn't mean that living organisms can take in that gas and use it automatically. It has to be fixed, and bacteria in the root system of plants, which we'll talk about when we get to community interactions, is extremely important in this process. And then here you can see the mutual relationship between the bacteria and in the root system. Phosphorus is going to be required for the production of cell membranes, DNA, and ATP. Phosphorus comes from rocks through the process called weathering, or the breakdown of rock over time. It also comes from animal waste and decomposition of organic material. Phosphorus is taken up into plants to make organic molecules, and then again, animals consume plants to get phosphorus. And then here is the phosphorus cycle. And that is the end of 9.2. So there is a form. And again, be sure you get these cycles down in your notes. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.